When a game claims to be heavily influenced by or inspired by one of your favourite games, it's easy to get excited at the prospect of rekindling a blast from the past. But more often than not, the hype doesn't live up to the promise, and you're left with a weak facsimile of a game that fails to do justice to the original ideals of the game it draws from. So when I received a copy of Crypticle, which cites some of my all-time favourite arcade games as its influences, namely SmashTV, Bubble Bobble and Gauntlet, with a dash of ghouls and ghosts thrown in for good measure, then colour me cynical but intrigued. So does Crypticle meet these promises? Would I buy that for $1, or is it total carnage? Let's dive headfirst into the crypts and find out. The story set up for Crypticle is perfect for an arcade game like this. It's basic, it's short, and it gives you the motivation you need to start shooting the place up. The kingdom has become complacent, and the absence of any wars have left the guards bored and lazy, and one unsuspecting day, with their guard down, the king's treasure is stolen along with the princess, swallowed up by a mysterious hole that appears in the castle grounds. That's all the motivation the slovenly knights need to dive into the hole and recover the kingdom's riches. What follows is an adventure through various dungeon floors, clearing rooms of enemies and beating bosses until you reach the princess and the gold. Each of the 8 to 10 or so rooms on each floor is a static one-screen affair, which is in keeping with its SmashTV vibe. Within seconds of the game starting proper, I was beaming as I saw flashing arrows on the ground, indicating the room exit. Classic SmashTV. There are loads of these little touches throughout the game, from the tiny gold and silver coins that remind me of the Amiga classic Chaos engine, to the plethora of fruit pickups straight out of Bubble Bobble and Rainbow Islands. Rooms are connected by a branching map, and again, just like SmashTV, this allows you to plot your way through to the boss. Along your journey, you can find some respite from the standard rooms by the way of a shop to upgrade your stats for a price, and a room that has an arcade machine in it. 10 coins in the slot will allow you to play another throwback game, this time a side-scrolling platformer which has a similar aesthetic to Ghouls and Ghosts. But this game is over in seconds really, and in some runs you don't even get to play it at all. For the majority of the game, you'll be clearing each room using the twin-stick shooter setup. Starting with an unlimited supply of basic throwing axes, you fight off hordes of varied enemies with different personalities. Some will amble around, minding their own business, while others will aggressively hunt you down. Help is at hand though, in the shape of random weapons that drop from enemies, giving the player limited uses of arrows, bombs and a rapid fire weapon, like the Nighthead in Ghosts and Goblins. There are a nice amount of weapons to collect, and due to a roguelike system, any found weapons on a run become more readily available in subsequent trips into the crypts. Enemies will also drop other power-ups and also fruity loot. Rainbow Island style, you can rush around and collect these, and in doing so increase your multiplier. If you can make it all the way up to 8 times without getting hit, then enemies start dropping stat upgrades instead, which allow you quicker movement, more health etc. for the rest of the game. It's a great, albeit tried and tested system of risk versus reward, as you try and snare all of the fruit before it flashes off the screen forever. So Crypticle's graphical style is a now familiar one of retro pixel art, although it suits the game perfectly well and is nicely drawn and colourful where needed. There's a nice variety in the monsters, and modern touches like explosions and lighting effects are handled well alongside these chunky pixels. One thing I would have liked is more frames of animation. For example, your knight's axes just fly out of his midriff with little in the way of any moving arm action, which looks a bit odd, although reminded me a lot of Robotron, another classic twin-stick shooter. Sonically, this game is also fine, the chiptune music conjuring up the atmosphere of a hectic dungeon crawl. Sometimes the game will lull into a quiet period though, where it seems the music has faded away, and if you're just running around the dungeon out of any action, you'll just hear the pitter-patter of feet, which is a little bit odd. I would have preferred a full-on pumping soundtrack to be abusing your senses and keeping the adrenaline up, but it's a minor niggle. I do really enjoy a lot of the sound effects in the game though, from the visceral thudding of weapons as they land, to the comical grunts and heaving of your character as he gets attacked. The gameplay department is definitely where this game shines though. As I mentioned at the start, I'm a huge SmashTV fan, and I've longed for a modern remaking of the game. And whilst that's unlikely to happen now, I can safely say that Crypticle has given me the closest feeling to that classic game than anything else claims to have ever been inspired by it. By staying true to having the right stick for firing your weapon rather than mapped to a face button is a huge plus, and something a lot of twin stick shooters fail to implement, often offering the right stick only as an aiming reticle. Also, the sheer number of enemies on screen and the way that you can carve through them with a decent weapon was a very familiar feeling, and of course the large end of stage bosses could have almost been lifted straight out of Smash. I've honestly been playing this game with a huge nostalgic grin on my face just thinking about playing SmashTV. This game can also be played in local 4-player co-op, although it's a shame there isn't an online option of this as well, which would have been really nice. There are, however, online leaderboards, which is always awesome for arcade games, and with a separate board for just friends, there's a lot of motivation here to keep aiming for a high score. Difficulty levels pitched about right, with the slow, ambling zombie-like horde in the early stages, giving way to rampaging, bloodthirsty harpies as the game progresses. You'll need to work on your stat upgrades if you're going to keep up with the later levels, and ensuring you snare as many weapon pickups as possible. If all else fails, you have a classic smart bomb at your disposal to help clear away any big batches of bastards in one go. Overall, Crypticle is a rare game that wears its influences on its sleeve before you and delivers on pretty much all of them. This is the modern day SmashTV clone, but with enough extra bells and whistles to keep things interesting during its pick up and play sessions. The price of admission is a tremendously fair £7.49 in the UK, which represents fantastic value for the amount of game you get here. Yes, it's been available on other systems for a few years, but this is just another great example of a game that's perfectly suited for the Switch. I've often played this just standing in the kitchen for 10 minutes whilst I prepare dinner, and then putting it on the TV for a couple of hours in the evening, and it suits both situations perfectly fine. If you're looking for a slice of arcade heaven, then don't overlook this one. And in the words of SmashTV's egocentric presenter, I love it! I'm going to score this one an 8.5 out of 10.